I identify with a lot of the disenfranchisement that the men who follow Jordan Peterson feel, and I just wish they had someone better to look to. All right, what are we talking about now? Oh, dude! Oh my God! Yes, dude. So I did a particularly self-destructive thing, and I watched the Peterson Zizek debate, or at least I watched the beginning of it. I watched Peterson's opening statement, which was about half an hour, right? It was basically 30 minutes of Peterson, 30 minutes of Zizek, and then 10 minutes of each to rebut. And I had to turn it off. I got through all of Peterson's remarks because I wanted to like honestly critique like his statements, but I couldn't take it. I watched a little bit of Zizek's remarks; they were okay. Like, it's astonishing to me. Like, the more and more I actually engage in good faith with Jordan Peterson, the more of a charlatan he proves himself to be. It's astonishing how incredibly ignorant he is about the topics he talks about with such confidence, and people take what he has to say as like complete gospel. And these guys will literally say, I'm not a big Peterson fan, but he makes a lot of really good points. And it really makes me start to wonder if there's like a script that these guys operate on of like saying, I'm not the biggest Peterson fan, but he makes a lot of good points. And they're literally being paid by some PragerU shit. Or there's like a forum where people say like, this is how you argue against people who oppose the cult, is you have to pretend not to be the biggest fan, because everyone does this shit. Every single person does this shit. They pretend like, oh yeah, I'm not a huge Peterson fan, but he makes a lot of really good points and he says absolutely nothing incorrect. And if you ever say he says anything incorrect, I'm going to fight you to the death. Like, he's really, really, really stupid. Like, incredibly stupid about anything having to do with anything but psychology. And I'm not qualified to critique what he has to say about psychology, so he might well be stupid on that as well. But I'm going to presume that because he has a PhD in the subject, that whatever he's saying has some kind of merit to it. Cool. Like, I just... So, like, let's talk about the first, like, absolute... He comes into a 3-hour debate with an academic talking about capitalism versus communism, right? And he cites the Communist Manifesto as the quintessential amalgamation of Marx's views, which is like, I'm trying to think of an appropriate analogy, right? Like, it would be like submitting a corporate pamphlet as the comprehensive literature on like free market capitalism. Like, there's no analogy for it. Like, there's actually like no appropriate analogy for it because it's so unbelievably like anti-academic. The Communist Manifesto, by the way, and you know, like, I'm not even like a communist or a socialist, and I know this, right? Like, the Communist Manifesto was literally written as a glorified memo for members of the proletariat who didn't have the level of education to have access to the super technocratic, esoteric, like, writings of economic and philosophic manuscripts. What am I doing? Like, it was supposed to be an ultra Cliff Notes summary of what it is about Marxist philosophy is intrinsically pro-worker, from the lens of like what is good and in the interest of workers, right? Which is not to say it's not like necessarily intelligent reading. But the point of the text is to galvanize workers. The point of the text is not to lay out a philosophy. The point of the text is it is propaganda. The philosophy is laid out in things in the 3 volumes of Capital. The philosophy is laid out in economic and philosophical manuscripts. I'm trying to remember what year it was from. Was it 1844, 1812, 18 something? I forgot. I don't fucking know the dates. It's mind-blowing what an anti-historical way to argue about Marx that is. because it's such an incomplete reading. It doesn't actually lay out the foundations of the philosophy of anti-capitalism. It doesn't lay out the critiques of capitalism, because the whole point of it is that it's not supposed to overload the reader with a bunch of different things. It's simply supposed to say, these are the problems with your life, and these are the things that we can do in order to, you have nothing to lose but your chains. These are the things that you can do in order to, like, make positive change in the society that you inhabit. It's a work of propaganda, not philosophy. Sorry, it's singularly a work of propaganda. All opinion in philosophy is propaganda in some sense. So building on that, his entire statement focuses on the Communist Manifesto, which is almost intentional because it leaves out answers to a lot of the questions that he poses to Marx. He claims that Marx blames hierarchy on capitalism, which is just, and his basis for it is that the Communist Manifesto doesn't go deeper than that, which is ridiculous. Like, the point of Marx's writings is that capitalism was a positive improvement on feudalism for even for toppling hierarchy or for undermining hierarchy. But the whole point is that it doesn't go far enough. That hierarchy is a problem in the process of human evolution, or unjustified hierarchy, right? Hierarchies that maybe used to be justified but are no longer justified, that there is no mechanism for getting rid of those hierarchies that are now restricting freedoms. And that capitalism doesn't provide the vessels, the apparatus for ridding humanity of those hierarchies. And what Peterson does is he strawmans Marx by basically omitting everything about Marx's writing that addresses this. And it's very easy to do because the document that he's engaging with is not a philosophical document. So he cherry picks basically the literature that he's critiquing in order to avoid a piece of literature that already addresses the questions he's going to pose in a very, very, very transparently, dishonest way. The other thing he says is that, he literally said that Marx suggests that the proletariat is inherently good and the bourgeoisie is inherently bad, which is just it's like such a high school libertarian reading of Marx. Not even libertarians would be that generally that dense about reading. So he says that close to the end of his remarks that he runs all of his clinical businesses for profit, and the reason he does that is so that the market will punish him for making mistakes, which is, you don't even understand capitalism at that point. Capitalism isn't when free markets. Capitalism is profit, and profit motive has nothing to do with how a business operates in the market. Pausing here because I believe this point does deserve some elaboration. Peterson's argument appears to be centered around the idea that if a business doesn't provide a high enough quality of service, then the revenue that it receives is not going to match its costs and it's going to shut down. Which is true enough, but then Peterson tries to imply this is somehow a function of profit motive. It's not. This is simply the arithmetic of how businesses run with or without profit. If your revenue doesn't match your costs, and you have no reason to believe that it will, if you're a private business, you're not going to be able to operate. And then once you layer that on top of the fact that profit motive actually incentivizes company owners to cut corners to maximize profits whenever they can get away with it, as opposed to simply providing the highest quality of service that you can at the lowest cost to the customer, which is something I think every single healthcare profession should try to do, including clinical therapy, it really does make Jordan Peterson's point particularly incoherent. Beyond all that, the main thing to remember about Peterson is that he regularly violates a handful of his own rules for life, right? The most chief among which are A, the one where he says, assume that the person you're talking to knows something you don't. He has never in his life actually done that in a debate. He has never, ever, ever gone into a debate presuming that he has something to learn from there. He's hostile, he's condescending, he's domineering, and no one has ever had a more self-righteous egomaniacal bent to the way that they conduct conversations because, and this comes directly from witness testimonies of people who have been close to him, he genuinely actually has a God complex. He actually genuinely believes that he has been divinely put on this earth to bring a very, very special message about the importance of like anti-SJW, like enter right-wing talking points here or there. Like that informs the way that he goes about life because he genuinely thinks, that he is exempt from the rules that he sets out for other people. Okay. I think he genuinely believes himself exempt, which is why he also doesn't follow his rule, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. This is a man who, this is literally a man who continued to rail against his government and his society for going in a direction he didn't like while he was continuing to struggle with the benzo addiction, which is actually, I think that's totally fine. 100% that is totally fine. The problem is that he advocates for these rules without actually adhering to them himself. So when I bring up his benzo addiction, I'm using that as an example of why I disagree with him, and I think he should be able to criticize the world. The thing is, it is incredibly hypocritical, and it shows the illegitimacy of his talking points and the fact that he doesn't actually truly believe what he's saying. For the record, addiction is a mental health and medical issue. It's a pity that he doesn't believe that, right? That's my point. Because if he did, he might be able to actually use his following to do some good for the world. But the amount of harm that he does, pushing a message that he clearly doesn't himself adhere to, is concerning. He could actually use his struggles and his mental health struggles to push much needed messages about mental health, especially for men, because he has the ear of a lot of disenfranchised men, of a lot of people who struggle with a lack of direction, and a lot of his own struggles are great teaching points about it is okay not to be okay. It is okay to be depressed, and it's actually okay not to conform to traditional societal expectations of men. But instead of doing that, he'll validate male depression, but he won't actually validate the fundamentally human emotional insecurity that comes with it, that men should be enabled to have, right? And the suppression of which is what leads to violence that is predominantly perpetrated by men. Instead, he'll seek to blame those problems on feminism as opposed to the natural conflict between what is expected of men under patriarchy combined with the reduced amount of space that exists for men to occupy traditional gender roles when space within those gender roles is being made for people who aren't men as well, right? That means we have to open up the definitions of what it means to be acceptable to be a man. And we also have to have some level of economic reform that allows... God damn it. All right, let me just focus on this sec. I think I'm switching to 70 star for the next stream. This trick is so stupid. I'd rather just get pissed off by 70 star over and over again, because at least that's my own mistakes. What's the worst thing that can happen to me? What, dry world RNG? Yeah, so instead of talking about the emotional liberation of men from patriarchal standards, which would be immensely beneficial to his target audience, he instead decides to essentialize the problems that men have to a break from what is traditional patriarchy, which is demonstrably untrue. That there are incredible swaths of men who don't subscribe to the prescriptions of patriarchy. And he decides, I'm not going to do anything for those guys. Instead, I'm going to try and brainwash them into thinking what their problem is that society has falsified them and tried to turn them into something that they're not, right? I really shouldn't be trying to do this, but whatever. All right. Nice. Time save. I think if you get it on the second try, it's a time save. Unless you do that. Yeah, it's discouraging because, like, I identify with a lot of the disenfranchisement that the men who follow Jordan Peterson feel. And I just wish they had someone better to look to. Who's actually able to, like, emotionally validate them as opposed to, like, just using them in order to fuel his own fucking God complex. It's so sad. Because he touches on all of, like, the problems, right? But with, like, actual introspection and, like, a touch of meditation, you start to realize that your issues are with a mismatch between not you and the way that society is going, but the foundations of what you were conditioned to expect of yourself. That's what the problem is. The problem isn't... Oh, all right, 2837, nice. The problem isn't that... The problem isn't that I can't get a high-paying job because, you know, somebody from a more marginalized, like, gender and racial intersection happened to, like, get into that position. It would be so valuable to, like, be able to, like, to have someone who teaches you to introspect and realize, oh, you know what, the problem isn't the person who got the job other than me. It's the same as, like, workers who blame their problems on immigrants as opposed to, like, corporate overall hierarchical structure. It's the same problem, right? The problem isn't the person who got the job instead of me. The problem is that was the job I was expected to have, and that's not necessarily what I want to do with life. The other problem is that society forces me to make an income while I'm trying to actualize myself. So even if engineering is what I want to do, there's this added pressure on me that I have to get that job in order to have that income, because I have to have that income in order to, like, support myself and, like, live. If you take away that pressure, if you alleviate that pressure, it makes it easier for me, even as somebody trying to be an engineer, to spend longer time, more dedicated time looking for a job, as opposed to maybe settling for work that pays the bills but makes me less happy and makes it harder for me to actually find what I really, really want to do within the field that I'm looking at. If I, like every other member of the workforce, have to apply like 600, 1,000 times with the right qualifications in order to get a job, then I should be able to have that time to do that. So that's a function of the economy failing me. The economy should be providing me support to look for the job that's in my field that I would bring value to society doing. But there's no such mechanism, right? And that's the thing that's failing men. And that's a mechanism that affects everybody in society, and it disproportionately affects Black people. It disproportionately affects women in the workforce. It disproportionately affects trans and non-binary people who face hiring discrimination, obviously. The difference is that those marginalized identities who aren't cis white men are used to being discriminated against in the workforce. So they don't react violently to it. They think that's part of what my lot in life, and I have to figure out a way to deal through it. With people, with like white men and Asian men who go into workforces, like, we've never had cause to think that we weren't entitled to a job. So it hits harder for us when we face a more difficult trajectory in a workforce. And it, quite frankly, makes us react more violently to it. Not like physically violently, but like we have a more volatile reaction to it. It's because we have been raised to expect better for ourselves. And we've been raised to get better for ourselves, right? Especially white men. And the truth is, we all deserve that level of better. The difference is when we don't get it, some of us are used to it because it's par for the course, and some of us are a little bit less passive about it because we don't consider ourselves to be part of the group that should be dealing with this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a pity because like Peterson takes that core issue, he relates to it, he like connects with it, and then he drives it all in the wrong path. And it's scary because the guy is like so unbelievable, such a suit. He's such a suit. Holy shit. It's so sad. It's like really sad. Anyway. Hey, check it out. I've got a brand new Discord server, the Shantastic Shack. Check the YouTube description. Join the community. Join the conversation. We've got politics. We've got gaming. We've got music and media. Don't disagree with my music takes. I'm objectively correct. But join the Discord. Peace.